Okay, I'm going to experiment this week with being slightly more organised, perhaps. So I have put together comments that I want to reply to by video, though after last week, there's too many to go through, basically, and because most of it was in or around the topic of Indestructo Boy and the safety tools, I've kind of limited it to that. It has been great to have so much positive feedback, even though I don't deal well with positive feedback. Praise, respect, these things are somewhat alien to me and I don't know what to do with them, but it makes a nice change, I suppose. It makes me think that maybe I do have something more to offer on some of the non-game related topics that we've touched on this channel. If I can bring that same aggressive reasonableness to other things and maybe reach out to a few people, maybe I can be a positive force. I don't know. The ego will probably dissipate rapidly, but it's been on my mind. Of course, things can't stay nice for very long because it's me. So, yes, I have to prove to the Department of Work and Pensions that my various illnesses that are never going to go away haven't gone away again. So that will be taking up a lot of emotional and mental bandwidth for at least the next couple of weeks, and hopefully they won't drag it out this time, as I have a habit of taking these things to tribunal, but we'll see. But keep your genitals crossed for me. I did a Roll for Insight video because someone asked a quite sort of specific question about Session 0, but I'm out of those. Waiting potentially on a couple of other people to give me some Roll for Insight questions or answers. If you want to ask me some more questions, or if you want to come on board and answer some questions as an influencer or a creator, and you can record at home, let me know. So yeah, it's a lot to do with Indestructo Boy and the fallout thereof. Too many comments to go through, but I've picked out a few. So on the actual conversation video, Dongo Bog said, I said people go looking for something to be upset about on racism. And he said, did you forget the context of the conversation? Was someone calling someone a racial slur with malicious intent? If that isn't clearly and obviously racism, then what is? Now, I didn't watch that part of the video because these are big boys and they can take care of themselves. I just wanted to deal with the part that had to do with me, and that was it. Okay, but there are contexts in which you can use racial slurs and it'd be fine. Singing along to rap lyrics, for example, or properly portraying an historical period where people were less hung up about these things, or there may be in-jokes between you and your friends who may be of that race or whatever, and it'll be fine in those circumstances. Just like, I'll call a close friend a cunt, and it won't really mean much because we're British and bants is something men do with each other. But since then I have gone and looked it up, and I still say Max can defend himself, right? But if he was really truly racist, I don't think he would be married to someone who was Asian. This isn't just, I've got an Asian friend. He's married to her, so he's clearly not disgusted or hateful towards Asian people. The further context, which was stripped from the original quote and so on, was that this was this pair of Asian guys who seemed to make it their, well, Max would say Canadian guys, I think, who are of Asian extraction, so yeah, it gets complicated. But they seem to make it their life's mission to attack and brigade anyone who creates an Asian game or setting who isn't Asian or who doesn't have Asians as sensitivity readers and so on, and seems to be angling for a job as a sensitivity reader. Given that context, I think a certain amount of anger is forgivable, and therefore, without a pattern of racist behaviour, I would be unwilling to condemn Max for this one slip. Right? It doesn't seem enough reason to hate pile on him. So, within the full context, there's reasons to be angry. Yeah, and it's a hyperbolic sort of radio call-in show sort of thing, so, I would be willing to let it slide this once, but if it kept happening, maybe I'd reassess my opinion of Max a little bit, but I don't think it's likely to. So there you go. You forced me into examining the whole thing. Not happy about it. Max is a big boy. He can take care of himself. Why don't you go and have the argument with him rather than me? Night of the Night Lady said, hate speech is just an open-ended excuse to ban any disagreement or criticism. I think there are things that we could, without equivocation or argument, probably all agree are or constitute hate speech, and we wouldn't quibble over them with each other. I also think there are other things that people consider hate speech that aren't. And that's where you get the problem. The problem with hate speech is that it is so ill-defined, in much the same way that what constitutes pornography is, that it's the thin end of the wedge. Someone says we're going to ban hate speech. You might be thinking of something truly extreme. Someone else might be thinking of something mild. You both think you're going to get your opinion enforced, and the law is open enough that the person with the more stringent conditions may well get their version enforced. So there's the problem with hate speech. Tabletop Gaming with Wolf added some of the context about it's Asians Represent is the channel, I guess. He says, Asians Represent are not nice people. Their claim to fame is attacking people. An example is other content creators. This has happened multiple times that create an Asiatic setting. But those content creators are not Asian. So Asians Represent then rallies people to get those content creators banned. Asians Represent happens to be working on getting D&D Shorts Kickstarter cancelled. Okay, I don't know the truth of that, but yeah, that adds context into who these people are, really. Let's see. Tabletop Gaming with Wolf also said on that video, the beginning almost sounds like Indestructible Boy seems a little nervous and scared, as if he was not entirely sure how to deal with this type of situation. I think that's a little unfair, but people are unsure how to deal with someone who's actually willing to discuss other than blocking and running away, and that he didn't suggests the opposite of nervous and scared to me. I was too tired to care either way at that point. So maybe that explains why I was quite so sort of louche as I was. But yeah, no, serious kudos to Indestructible Boy for actually having the conversation, which no one else has been willing to have for the past 10 years or so. On the video, Indestructible Boy picks a fight, which was my original sort of response, so slightly outdated, but some of the comments were interesting. Robbie Mack says, innovation from the 70s, 80s, 90s and 2000s would never have happened with safety tools, not just in RPGs. Safety tools offer a level of relevancy to those wielding its power, and there are other ways to achieve the importance in innovation that they seek, with censorship being the least of them. Much like every latest and greatest edition of D&D, more rules means less and less imagination with each new release. It's a hard lesson for some to learn. See also Wizards as of late. Yeah, I don't think the sort of Iron Age games of the 90s could have happened in this context. I mean, we see how the new White Wolf games are kind of faltering in the face of all this, and it's hard to imagine, you know, all of those kind of edgy, dark, occult games of the 90s really succeeding in this kind of atmosphere. That's ironic because to many people they see that as the start of all this, and it's also sad because it was a time of great innovation and change and shift in emphasis and so on, without necessarily sacrificing what already existed and made games great. So yeah, I think there's some insight there. On my thoughts and decompression video, Venus Boys 3 said, I kinda sorta agreed with his argument that the tables at the store/convention were the property of the hosting entity, less so the players at the table. But if they agree for you to run a game of Colt or the Whispering Vault or Unknown Armies, what is the expectation? Should a sensitive person maybe look before they leap into something that might come up against their sensitivity? Some responsibility needs to rest with the oh-so-sensitive person to have a modicum of awareness about what they're getting themselves into, rather than expecting the entire world to pull its punches because they're so easily wounded. And yeah, I agree. On the stores and conventions things, right? You're providing unpaid labour, usually, to the convention, to the store, to the game club, which enables it to be an ongoing concern. So you are adding value by being there and running a game, right? And these stores and conventions and clubs and so on, they're meant to be for role-playing games, not a particular role-playing game or a particular style or way of playing that role-playing game. At a convention, you want as broad a base as possible, unless you're a specialist convention, right? You want people playing all sorts of games. You want people playing all sorts of new games. You want people to be exposed to all these new products and so on, so they can enjoy them, so you can create positive buzz. So if you're selling, you can sell your games to them. So to place these kind of controls on everyone harms everybody, including the convention as a whole. And it also will end up excluding people who make the darker, edgier content from those conventions. Some people will say, oh, good. But I think that's to miss the point to a large degree. Mercutio UK says, algorithm aside, you need two parties who are willing and adult enough to have such a discourse. That might well be the stumbling block that's preventing it. Progress, however. Yeah, so the algorithm is normally not kind to people being reasonable at each other, which is why I think we made the thumbnails and so on look a bit more combative, if not necessarily the titles, in order to try and reach people. But yeah, it's finding the willing people that's the problem. I've had various people approach me over the last decade or so, supposedly willing to talk, and then they always back out at the last minute, which is annoying to say the least. I've always said, and I always have been, open to talk to anybody. I've had conversations outside gaming with avowed white supremacists before. Right, I'll have the conversation. I'll have the conversation with anybody on just about anything, provided I have a thought-out position on it. So why these people never have done, I don't know. Unless, and I don't think I'm psychic, I don't know their motivations, but unless they knew that this is what would happen, that I'm a reasonable chap and not the monster they've made me out to be, and that it would create sympathy for me, perhaps. If you've devoted so much time into turning me into a figure of hate, me actually turning up, cheerfully and offering you a jam sandwich, it's not going to do them much good, is it? R. Larkinson said, you've definitely been on the receiving end of this sort of thing before, so I guess you reacted out of routine. The current zeitgeist and online culture are definitely part of the reason why responses happened the way they did. Other than this, consider this a significant success. Nowadays, it's not often things end up with a dialogue between parties that opens the door to both sides actually listening and maybe learning from one another openly. Sorry, Flame War lovers, you're not going to get your daily drama fix here. Grimm's too aggressively reasonable for that. Thank you for that. I hope this starts something off, because this has been somewhat successful for both our channels. I've picked up about 160 subscribers, a few haters, but mostly not. So I hope this will lead to more conversations about other things in an equally deep way. Erad3035 says, your supposition about a cross-section of gamers not being able to differentiate between real and imagined threats may be true, but I think it's more that victimhood has become a form of currency. Being a victim is an extremely low-hanging fruit for the unremarkable to grab. Also, in your talk with Indestructo Boy, I will correct you from that, you said it's your responsibility to own your shit at a gaming table, instead of forcing everyone else to bear the cross with you. And I am 100% in agreement. I suspect most people are, however, people like Indestructo Boy and Ginny, and fundamentally disagree with that premise. In fact, they expect you to shoulder the burden and label you an evil person when you refuse to meet their ridiculous demands. What's worse is that in many cases their trauma is exaggerated and only put on display in order to collect victim currency. It's a little bit of an unfair way of putting it, but yes, victimhood has become a form of currency, and an inverted hierarchy is still a hierarchy. And just to remind everyone, I am still a left anarchist, so hierarchies rub me the wrong way unless they're emergent and just as quickly dissipate when they're no longer needed. I think owning your shit is terribly unfashionable right now, and there are no structures that encourage you to own or manage your own shit, because social currency so much comes from being victims. I hate drawing attention to the ways in which I fit into certain minorities or my illnesses and things. I mostly do that in order to raise awareness and to create conversations around it, or when I'm arguing with the kinds of people that give currency to these issues, because it almost inevitably causes them to underline their own hypocrisy when they don't take my issues into account. But I still hate to do it. On the Roll for Insight video on Session 0, Robbie Mack said, agreed, Session 0 is just another made-up word by newer players out there wanting to make a difference. Difficult to understand how a bunch of strangers think they can make everyone happy at a table. For grognards like you and many of us, the table is a bit more intimate, in that there's a value of friendship and a level of trust involved. Asking someone if they want to play D&D these days has almost zero risk of being punched in the face or accused of Satanism like it did when we were kids. Yeah, that's true, though you'd think it would make us more careful, not less. I do think this formalization is like a lot of modern activism, people wanting to feel like they're making an important difference in the world, even when they're not, when we've made so much progress on so many things. It creates hyper-focus on these other little things. I also think it's foolish to try and make everybody happy at every table. Then you'll just end up with the most anodyne pap imaginable. Not everybody has to be happy at every table or with every game. Every table, every game is not for everybody. I think that's an idea that needs to die in a fire. Sorry, I have the sniffles a bit today. Erin the Relentless says, my core problems with safety tools are the inference that RPGs aren't safe already. It's like wearing a helmet going to bed because you feel that you might bump your head. I know it's unnecessary and makes you look stupid. Because if there's a specific personal reason you need to do that, I don't know it. I just know that normal people don't have to do that. Yeah, I'm plainly stating that those who need safety tools are abnormal for doing so. Normal people who have a problem with real snakes and real spiders can still play in against the Cult of the Reptile God or Expedition to the Demon Web Pits and not be triggered by content. The gamer couch isn't the therapy couch. Go sort yourself out, because it's your problem, not the group's problem. Tangentially but related by way of RPG twit drama, my core problem with putting disclaimers on old D&D products denoting that they were racist/sexist incorrectly states that they were racist/sexist when it was simply never the case. Even the malice/maximum to strength that human women got in AD&D was rooted in science, not sexism. Explaining differences in male versus female biology isn't sexism, merely an adherence to the notion of a reality simulation. I think the vocal minority of gamers supporting these needs a high dose of own your shit and a chaser of stop being a drama queen. Maybe afterward go outside and touch some grass. Try to get a better grip on reality itself. Being sensitive to everything and taking offence to anything is no way to live. There are so many better experiences and emotions to dwell on. So there's a lot there in that comment, but I thought it was a good one that went over a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah, the very idea that RPGs aren't safe is something that many people, including myself, do find ludicrous. Because by safe, we mean safe. Not that it won't upset you, not that it won't offend you. That's got nothing to do with safety. And where were all these people with PTSD in the past 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades? Where were they? Why wasn't this a problem until now? And you can say, oh, well, we've got better diagnostics and so on now, but surely, regardless, we'd have had people collapsing at the table into fits in the past, which isn't something that we ever had. So yeah, something is rotten in the state of Denmark when it comes to people's reactivity to the mere description of a spider or a snake or whatever else. It doesn't pass the sniff test. That may just be age talking, but it really doesn't seem to. Yeah, the disclaimers on the old D&D content, I don't think people understand quite how insulting that has been to a lot of older gamers. D&D was never my bag, but I certainly sympathise with the people who are upset by it. And yeah, they don't contain any racism or sexism unless you define those terms so utterly broadly as to be meaningless. Yeah, everyone could do with a bit more, own your own shit and stop being a drama queen. I think everyone could do with a dose of that, but that's the world we live in. Those things are rewarded. Letting it all hang out and being a drama queen pays dividends, unfortunately. So no one's encouraged to do those things. And we wouldn't want to take it too far the other way either, would we? DM Zach says, I feel like you're making a lot of assumptions that players are familiar with TTRPGs. Safety tools in my mind are for new players or new groups that haven't played together before. I don't think it's unreasonable to be like, hey, we're going to have gore, adult themes, etc. in the game. Anyone have a problem with that? I feel like safety tools are very exaggerated as this overbearing imposition. It can literally be like 2 questions and move on. As a DM, I don't feel pressured that some people want them. If I'm gaming, I want my players to have fun, not be uncomfortable. Right, there's a bit to unpack there. Let's start at the end and work backwards. Fun encompasses a huge number of different things. If I'm playing a horror game, I want to be uncomfortable. I want to be disgusted. I want to be fearful. I want to feel unsettled, creeps out. These are things that we normally think of as negative and unfun, but they are the point of horror as a form of entertainment, right? So there is no single narrow way to have fun, but a lot of these tools and so on seem to think that there are. Now, asking a couple of questions isn't really a safety tool. It's not formalized. It's not impositional in the same way that these safety tools are. So I think this is the same kind of misunderstanding and talking past one another that I had with Indestructo Boy to an extent. Ben F says, I personally think it's generational. We're just on the bad side of the cycle again. People worked for decades to get one another to set aside labels as the primary things that differentiate people, and millennials just didn't. The social technologies come out of that atomization of human experiences and the universal belief of the younger that they invented everything. I don't like to be old man, shouts at Cloud, but yeah, we do seem to be in the bad part of the cycle again. But we have been for about twice as long as these cycles normally last. It's normally about 5 years. It's been about 10. And yeah, I think a lot of us who were teens or young adults in the 90s, we look back to that as a better time. Now, I mean, a lot of things were worse statistically in terms of racism, sexism, and so on, but the attitudes towards it all were a lot better. I feel like the attitudes today are entrenching and increasing the remaining racism, sexism, homophobia, all the rest of it, because it just seems to be two more and more extreme parties, one on either side of an issue, reacting to each other and becoming more extreme over and over again. And so it goes. Whereas the kind of 90s attitude of, okay, yeah, and seems to be a lot more healthy than either people trying to force you to celebrate whatever it is about them or trying to force you to hate whatever it is about someone else. It seems like a massive step backwards to me. Lepidoptera666 says, Gatekeepers, which is another podcast show, will be doing private versus public games and what is different in them. You should be on it or talk to Cigar DM sometime. I am happy to go on any shows, but I have no bandwidth spare to organise that shit. So just get in touch with me, invite me on. If we can make the hours work, I'll come on and discuss whatever. I've left off who asked this, but do you think there's a disconnect between the sort of social technologies, Session Zero, safety tools, etc., writ large, that have developed in the era of hegemonic online play, specifically of 5th edition and traditional in-person play? For example, it seems psychotic and performative to sit around a table and make all your friends talk about their traumas. You should probably have a good idea if your paladin, who is a mailman in reality, was badly mauled by a dog, and whether they are or aren't okay with a setting where his paladin may well be eaten by a direwolf. When you obliterate these social ties in a group found over Discord, maybe some of this artificial feeling, getting to know you stuff makes some sense. I wouldn't know, I don't generally game with strangers. To be clear, I think there are serious problems with online play. You lack the physicality of atmosphere, props, real dice, sharing food and beers while you play. You cut out the cross-chatter that allows less outspoken players to contribute to decision-making and favour the loudest and boldest. You're a bunch of little video squares on a screen. The sort of culture war associations, wokeness, snowflakes, trigger warnings that makes discourse over safety tools evergreen kind of belies a deeper shift, away from meat space onto digital platforms. Not to get too pretentious about it, but it kind of looks like the broader malaise of online, yelling at each other for being performatively nice or nasty while we all traipse towards atomization and isolation. I don't know. Video certainly helps, and I've grown close with people online, including gaming groups online. The kind of pickup groups that maybe you're more referring to, I still don't think the safety tools make much sense there because it's a pickup group. You know, you don't need to learn the entire life story of someone in a pickup game of some online game, you know, so a shooter or something. You just need to know whether they're any good, if that, and they're probably going to scream faggot at you half a dozen times anyway. So I still don't think it makes sense. It might be an attempt to compensate for that sort of thing and to create sort of artificial closeness or an artificial conscience for those who have none. I don't know, but I still don't think it's necessary. All right, shifting tack. I talked about the attempted cancellation of Alice Cooper over his actually fairly nuanced trans comments. Jeffer Fox Mustang says, a few months ago Dee Snider said the same thing Alice did. I don't understand why people get so worked up about a celebrity's opinion. Everyone should be able to have an opinion. Alice would have been demonized had he refused to answer. They would have found a way to read something into his refusal to answer. And yeah, that's all true. When it comes to these stars from the 70s and 80s, kind of died out after the 80s, really. The reason I think they go to them is because they challenged gender norms at the time. You know, glam rock did it, and all of the hair metal and all of that, with their crazy get-ups and their makeup and so on, was challenging a lot of these gender stereotypes. So I think a lot of these interviewers come to these people expecting them to have certain answers, or not to have such nuanced opinions, or to just say exactly the right thing, because they have these expectations of them, and they think people will be interested in their opinion, given that they've been through it to an extent. So I think that's why people get so worked up when they have the wrong opinion or a more nuanced opinion. So on the Baldur's Gate 3 video, Precipice of Reason said, "It's a bot-driven hype machine. The game isn't that great, but people have been eagerly brainwashed. It wasn't released in a finished state. There are loads of bugs still. There are assets from the Divinity series in Baldur's Gate 3. They didn't reinvent anything. They just put out a product with less release date exploitation. They still exploited the modern market by doing early access. The lack of Day 1 DLC is the only thing that sets Larian apart." Oh, and that's a fairly relentlessly negative comment. What interests me is how it is interfacing with modern Wizards, with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and how it's like a fly in amber from when they got the license, and it bears so little real resemblance to actual modern D&D. That's the part I find fascinating. The rest is interesting as well, the reactions and so on, but yeah, it's a start. On the Kalergi plan, you knew this was coming. Anonini said, "Get ratioed, you pale liar," who, like many of his compatriots, has never heard of the argumentum ad populum, or why it's a logical fallacy. Devilfish says, "Bro got a PhD in fabricated sciences, where up is down and facts are merely suggestions," but failed to offer any facts or anything to debunk me whatsoever. I include this next one because it's kind of interesting. I suspect these are from white supremacists pretending to be Islamic extremists. And they turn up every now and again. You know, at least it shows some sort of low animal cunning, if not intelligence. Wars with the Europeans will end. The European race is done. What the fuck is the European race? We, the Asiatic people, will finally reign supreme once more. Our time, our lives will be our own again. To any Euro who is annoyed, it's your fault, not mine. It's a war of survival, and I hold no hatred towards the Euro. But the competition you gave us for 200 years was arduous. Then the liberal woke culture came into existence, and it is like a tumour, weakening the European continent. I support it in your own countries because it is deadly and it is working. I, of course, do not support it in my country because I know its dangers. I only want dangers for you, not for us. Just as Darwin once said, survival of the fittest. Well, someone never understood that point. In this generation, the West seems to have lost its morals, its values, and pretty much soon its identity. Lose everything, prestige, wealth, power, but keep those three to survive. So you see what I mean? It's a bit too on the nose, and you get those every now and again. Amiala says, "What a waste of time this video is. It's nothing but an idiotic, coward, hippie rant, completely avoiding and misconstruing today's pressing issues. I don't think a conspiracy theory based around a misapprehension of a book written in German in the 1920s, I don't think that's a pressing issue. So, try again." Jello Dianella says, "Kudos to you, man. 85% of this comment section is just pure stupid sheep blabbering. Remember, you won't change their minds because they're all mindless sheep repeating what their crowd is saying." And that is the first positive comment I've had on that video in a very long time. On my UK invaded small boats video, Dongo Bog said, just a fair warning, the bait title nearly made me dismiss you as a bigot and leave when I was browsing your videos to get a read on you. Well, you shouldn't be doing investigations into people anyway. And if I gave it a more straightforward title, then the racists and bigots and xenophobes who needed to see it would never have clicked on it. So I'm here to try and change some of their minds or expose them to opposing points of view, not to make you feel comfortable. On the D&D SRD audiobook, Lisa Simpson Liberal said, I made it to elves before the YouTube ads gave me stage 4 cancer. Good luck to my fellow survivors. At least that means it's being monetized, I suppose. But you can just go to DriveThruRPG and you can download it for free, or you can give me a donation for the huge amount of time and effort that went into recording that, should you be so inclined. Zang. I have a woefully undersubscribed subreddit, so please do me a favour, if you're a Redditor, head on over to r/postmortem studios and talk about anything related to any of my shenanigans. Peace.